You should never have to earn your family's love. But I did. I built a business for them, and the day it finally became profitable, they fired me to give my job to my brother. That wasn't a line from a movie. That was my Tuesday. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever worked your heart out for people who just took you for granted, then you need to see how this ended. Because everyone thinks the story ends when you get fired. They hand you a box for your things. They walk you to the door, and that's it. Game over. But what if I told you that getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me? And that I walked out of that building knowing, with 100% certainty, that within 24 hours, I would own everything. This is the story of how my family tried to throw me away, and how I used their own playbook to take it all back. So, let's rewind. My family business was a logistics company. My dad started it decades ago, and for a long time, it was okay. It paid the bills. But by the time I finished college, it was a sinking ship. Outdated methods, clients leaving, barely breaking even. My dad was stressed, my mom was worried, and my younger brother, Kyle. Well, Kyle's biggest concern was which new sneakers to buy with the allowance he still got at 22. He'd never had a real job. He'd interned at the company a few times, which meant he'd show up at noon, play games on his phone, and leave early. My parents never said a word to him about it. For me, different story. They asked me to come on board. They said, "Alex, we need your fresh ideas. You're a hustler. You can save this." And I was young, I was ambitious, and more than anything, I wanted to make them proud. I wanted to prove I was the son they could count on. So I said yes. I became the general manager. And I worked. I worked. For the first 2 years, I was the first one in at 6 a.m. and the last one out, often past 10 p.m. I was the operations manager, the head of sales, the IT guy, the marketing department. I modernized our entire system, moved us to a digital platform. I personally went out and won back our old clients and brought in big new ones. I was doing the work of 5 people. And the money? It was terrible. I was on a skeleton salary because, as my parents said, we're all family here and we need to reinvest every dollar. So I took a pay cut, believing in the future. I watched my friends buying cars, going on nice vacations, while I was driving a 10-year-old car and living in a tiny apartment, pouring all my energy into the family business. Meanwhile, Kyle was still getting his allowance. He'd stroll in sometimes, and my mom would literally make him a coffee and ask him about his weekend. I was in the trenches, and he was a guest. The imbalance was so obvious, but every time I tried to bring it up, it was, "Oh, Alex, don't be dramatic. You know Kyle is finding his way." Or, "Be patient with your brother." I was patient. I was too patient. After 3 years of my life, the company wasn't just saved, it was thriving. We were more profitable than we had ever been in our history. We had a waiting list of clients. We moved to a bigger, nicer office. And that's when things started to shift. My parents started getting comfortable. And Kyle started getting ambitious. He suddenly started showing up more, wearing new suits, sitting in on my meetings, taking notes. He'd make these vague comments to my dad like, "You know, I've been thinking about the big picture strategy." He had no idea how the day-to-day operations even worked. He couldn't process a basic shipping manifest. But my parents ate it up. Look at Kyle, taking an interest. It was like they forgot the 3 years of blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into the place. The tension built up over a few months. I'd make a decision, and Kyle would go behind my back to my parents and question it. My authority was being undermined constantly. I felt like I was babysitting a 30-year-old while trying to run a multi-million-dollar company. The final straw was when I found out Kyle had promised a client a huge discount without talking to me or anyone in sales, completely messing up our pricing model. I was furious. I went to my parents and said, "This has to stop. He's undermining me, and he's costing us money." And their response? My dad sighed and said, Alex, you need to be a team player. Kyle has great people skills. Maybe you could learn from him. I remember just staring at him, my stomach sinking. That was the moment I knew. The writing was on the wall. They were choosing him. They had always chosen him. A week later, they called me into the big conference room, the nice one we only used for important clients. Both my parents were there, sitting on one side of the table. Kyle was there too, trying to look serious, sitting next to them. There was a single folder on the table. I knew exactly what it was. My dad started talking. He said something about restructuring and new leadership dynamics. He said my management style had become too aggressive and was creating a negative atmosphere. He said they needed a softer touch for the next phase of growth. It was all corporate buzzwords, a complete script. My mom just looked down at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. Then he slid the folder across to me. It was a termination letter, effective immediately. They were letting me go. And Kyle was being promoted to general manager. My job. The job I built from the ground up. I looked at Kyle and I saw the faintest smirk on his face. This was his victory. He had finally won the only game he was ever playing, the game for my parents' approval. And here's the part that shocked them. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I felt this incredible calm wash over me. Because in that moment, I wasn't their disappointed son. I was a chess player, and they had just walked their king right into my trap. I picked up the pen. I looked my dad right in the eye. And I said, "Okay, just that. Okay." I signed the paper. I stood up. My mom finally looked up. Her face was a mix of shock and guilt. They expected a fight. They expected drama. My compliance confused them. "Alex, we hope you understand this is just business," my dad stammered. I smiled, a small, cold smile. "I understand perfectly," I said. "I'll clear my desk." I walked out of that room, down the hall, and I started packing my personal things into a box. A few of the employees I was close to looked horrified. Some were crying. I just told them, "It's going to be okay, trust me." As I was carrying the box out to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother. "Sorry it had to be this way, bro. No hard feelings." I didn't reply. I got in my car, drove home, and I opened my laptop. Because the real work was just beginning. So what was the plan? Years ago, when I first started, and the company was still struggling to pay me, my old mentor, a ruthless and brilliant businessman who had seen his own family drama, sat me down. He told me, "Alex, never work for family without leverage. They will use love as currency, and you will always be in debt." He advised me to structure my pay differently. For the first 18 months, when my salary was practically nothing, I had a contract that converted a huge chunk of my back pay into company shares. My parents thought it was a great idea at the time. They were getting a key employee for almost free, and they didn't have to part with any cash. They saw the shares as worthless pieces of paper for a failing company. They never read the fine print. They never had their lawyer properly review it. It was just their son, Alex, being accommodating. The fine print stated that my shares were non-dilutable. That's a key word. It meant that if the company issued more shares to raise money, my percentage of ownership wouldn't get smaller. It was locked in. And over those 3 years, as I brought in more investors and we grew, my initial small share package, through a series of conversions and anti-dilution clauses, had ballooned into a massive, silent chunk of the company. I had been quietly, secretly, becoming the single largest shareholder. My parents and Kyle were so focused on the title of manager, they forgot who actually owned the place. That night, I didn't sleep. I was on the phone with my lawyer and going through the corporate bylaws. The company was technically an S corporation, and the bylaws were very clear. Any shareholder with a 25% or greater stake could call a special board meeting for a vote on company leadership. I had 34%. I drafted the email right there. It was short, formal, and legally precise. It stated that as a major shareholder, I was invoking my right to call an emergency board meeting the following morning at 10 a.m. to vote on a motion of no confidence in the current leadership and to propose a new board of directors. I sent it to my parents, to Kyle, and to the company's legal counsel. The read receipts started popping up almost instantly. My phone started blowing up. First, it was my mom. "Alex, what is this? What are you doing? You're upset. Let's talk about this as a family." I didn't answer. Then my dad. "Son, this is an embarrassment. You're going to ruin everything we built. Stop this nonsense." I let it go to voicemail. Then Kyle. He was screaming, "You're trying to sabotage me. I'm the manager now." "You can't do this." I just muted his number. The desperation in their voices was like music. They finally understood that I wasn't playing their game anymore. The next morning, I put on my best suit. I walked back into that office building at 9:55 a.m. I didn't have a box this time. I walked straight into the same conference room where they had fired me less than 24 hours earlier. My parents and Kyle were already there, along with their lawyer, who looked pale and was shuffling through papers frantically. Kyle looked like he hadn't slept. My dad tried to start with, "Now, Alex, let's be reasonable." I cut him off. "The meeting is called to order," I said, my voice flat and steady. "As per the corporate bylaws, we will now proceed to a vote." I laid it all out. I presented the documents showing my share ownership. I presented the motion, a vote to remove my father as CEO, my mother as CFO, and my brother as general manager. I proposed a new board with me as the chairman and CEO. Our lawyer, who was technically employed by the corporation, had to confirm it. He looked at my parents and gave a slow, grim nod. "The shares are valid. The call for a meeting is legitimate. We have to vote." The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. The vote was based on share percentage, not per person. My parents together had 51%. I had 34%. The remaining 15% was split between a few silent partners I had already called the night before and secured their support. They were business people. They had seen my results and they had zero faith in Kyle. When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. My motion passed. Just like that, in under 5 minutes, I stripped them of all their power. I was now in control. The look on their faces. It was a mix of pure shock, betrayal, and utter horror. My mom was crying. My dad was bright red, speechless. Kyle just kept repeating, "This isn't legal. You can't do this." But it was. It was completely 100% legal. I had played the long game, and I had won. I then looked at Kyle and said, "As for your position and the positions of your two friends you hired last week, without approval, your services are no longer required. Security will escort you out." I had pre-arranged for a security team to be on standby. They walked in and stood by the door. The humiliation was complete. The fallout was intense. The following weeks were a whirlwind. My parents were still shareholders, but they were now minor ones with no say. I offered them a choice, straight from the corporate playbook. They could either keep their shares as silent partners and trust me to run the company, or I would give them the opportunity to sell their shares back to the company. But the share price was set at the pre-turnaround valuation, from back when I first started. It was a fraction of what the company was worth now. It was a brutal but fair business decision. They were furious. They called me every name in the book, said I had destroyed the family. But I didn't start this fire. I just controlled how it burned. In the end, my mom couldn't handle the shame and sold her shares back. She took a huge financial loss, but she wanted out. My dad, to his credit, eventually swallowed his pride. He realized that without me, his shares would eventually be worthless under Kyle's management, which had lasted exactly 1 day. He decided to keep his shares and even stay on in a minor advisory role, though he reports to me now. It's awkward, but it's the bed he made. As for Kyle, he was cut off completely. No job, no allowance, no golden throne. Last I heard, he's living with a friend and still figuring things out. With my family's constant interference and negativity gone, it was like a weight had been lifted off the entire company. The employees were thrilled. They were loyal to me, not to the family name. We were finally able to operate at full capacity, without the drama, without the favoritism. We implemented all the ideas my parents had shot down. We expanded into new markets. We invested in tech, and the business, it exploded. In the first year under my complete control, the company's value tripled. The shares my dad held on to are now worth more than the entire company was when he was running it. The friends who invested with me became millionaires, and I finally got the reward for all my years of hard work. So, what's the moral of the story? It's not screw over your family. It's this: know your worth and never, ever give someone else the keys to your kingdom without making sure you have a key of your own. I loved my family. I really did. But in business, love isn't a strategy. Loyalty isn't a contract. You have to protect yourself. I learned the hard way that sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones who underestimate you the most. They thought I was just the hardworking son. They never saw the strategist. They never imagined I was playing a different game entirely. Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to cash in the leverage I had quietly built for years. It was the final move in a game they didn't even know we were playing.